And Andy, thanks for joining us on the Synthetic Friday, as we've been saying. But we're also going to take a look at Hasbro.
Yep, that's right. Glad to be here. Yeah, Hasbro, when we dug into this, it was a little surprising to me. You know, Hasbro is kind of that consummate toy maker that you think of when you think about being a kid, but things have really fallen off for this company. And when we looked at our data, which LikeFolio tracks people talking about actually purchasing the brands and products that Hasbro makes. And when we look at that on a quarterly basis, over time, we saw we saw a nice little uptick there, 2015, 2016, 2017, and even into the early parts of 2018. But recently, we've seen a real drop off. And what I have circled in red on here is actually the quarter that Hasbro is going to be reporting next week compared to its the same quarter a year ago, and you can see a significant decline there. And you know, it's one of those things where we see a continuation of a negative trend for Hasbro. They face a lot of headwinds as a company, and Toys R Us closing was one of those kind of big moments for them. They blamed their last quarter on Toys R Us closing, and we're just seeing follow through on that. We're seeing negative follow through in terms of people talking about buying these brands and products.
You know, Andy, you're right. Much like we did with the apparel sector when Sports Authority went down, right? A lot of these toy makers have been hurt by Toys R Us going down, but Walmart has picked up the pace. Target picked up the pace around Christmas to try to fill in where Toys R Us fell off, but it sounds like they didn't get there in terms of filling the gap.
Yeah, you know, when we look at the data, we start to think there may be more to this story. There may be a bigger headwind at play. You know, kids, it just doesn't seem like they want toys as much as they used to. They have a phone or an iPad mini or something like that in their pocket all the time. Their next toy is literally a download away. And so Hasbro has a kind of a new environment to get into. Less people are walking into stores looking for something to buy their kids. They're more like the kid is coming to them and saying, here's what I want, can I download it, yes or no?
Andy, you must have read my mind, because I was just going to ask that. I was like, I'm thinking back to when I was a kid, and we played with action figures and toys, and we went outside and played football or whatever it would be. But nowadays, it does seem like so much of it is more electronic focused off of those devices. But for more on, we're going to hold this stuff for more on social media. We're going to bring in TD Ameritrade Network contributor Evelyn Baker. Evelyn, thanks for joining the show.
Hi, of course, happy to be here.
By the way, Hasbro has earnings next Tuesday. That's
Tuesday
why we're covering this today.
Before the market,
right.
Yes. Evelyn, you have a couple things on Hasbro as well from Twitter, right?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was looking over Twitter to see what people are talking about, they're definitely talking about their action figures and the different things that they buy, Hasbro versus Mattel as well, but they're also talking about some very specific Hasbro products. They recently unveiled a retro Star Wars line, which goes to sort of the great brands that this company has.
Right.
And our first tweet directly speaks to that. Our first tweet is from Mike Onofrio. He says, Hasbro, what do I have to do to get my hands on one of those Celebration exclusives? And I think that is talking about those Star Wars action figures, the retro ones, and it seems like people are still very excited about those products.
So Andy, when I see something like this, though, isn't that going to cater more to like someone like me as opposed to like the young kids, which is going to be their target audience, you'd think, as a toy company?
Yeah, you know, it's really about business experimentation, I think, at this point. The fact that Hasbro is leaning on, you know, exclusives or, you know, selling collectibles rather than just selling toys to the masses, I think speaks volume about, you know, how much the company's having to change due to these headwinds that we talked about earlier.
And one more follow-up, if we can, just talking about your data. So when I was looking at that chart, I think it was important to note the circles that you showed, as that's actually going to be what this particular earnings announcement is about. But if you're seeing the one right after it, like the one that's current, the current quarter that we're kind of in right now, that seems to be sort of an uptick. So when you're looking at something like this, if you're going to correlate it, does that seem like maybe their guidance might be a little bit stronger going forward?
Yeah, Alex, that's a great question. So that last bar is an average, it's the pace of the current quarter, which is only, you know, 2 weeks old at this point. So there's not much data there. You know, you're probably getting like a little bit of a pre-Easter kind of bump there. I expect that quarter to come down. So that's the current pace. It's not, you know, it's way too early, I think, to think that that's going to impact guidance. But you never know. They might be pretty desperate for something positive to say.
Well, Andy, I think that's actually important that you clarified that, because looking at that initially, that was kind of my first thought. So that's actually really good. Evelyn, you got another tweet for us, though. Is that correct?
I do, yes. Our next tweet is from Foko Zane Maloka. He says, the toy industry is beyond fascinating, and these global companies are run by some of the most eccentric characters. From Mattel to Hasbro to Nintendo to Playmobil, etc. And I can't speak specifically to those owners, but I feel like this sort of speaks to the toy industry as a whole, and Funko's not included in that tweet unless I missed it, but I feel like Hasbro is sort of going in that route that Funko has a really great hold on as far as offering their products, not only in stores like Toys R Us, but you see them in GameStop, you see them sort of all over.
Yeah, and so Andy, when I'm hearing something like this, though, I think that makes sense. So as these companies need to kind of reinvent themselves. Because when I think of toys now, and it may just be because I'm older now than I was obviously when I was a kid, but I think of them more as like collectibles, in terms of like they're more nostalgic to somebody like me, as opposed to like you're mentioning, you know, if you're a kid now, you're going on the iPad, you're playing, you know, some game that, you know, they're new every day, but they're learning things through that, as opposed to just actually playing with action figures and more imaginative as it was when we were kids.
Yeah, you know, I think that's right. I think Funko is a great comparison because they've really tapped into kind of that toys for adults kind of thing. You know, but what I'd say is, you know, it's kind of like, you know, that last tweet reminded me of the movie Big, where Tom Hanks, you know, becomes an adult overnight, and gets his dream job at a toy company and totally turns things around. I think that that's the kind of spirit that some of these companies may need to inject into themselves. They seem a little bit geared towards what used to work, and instead of thinking about what kids actually want today.